all right, okay, so is America a Christian nation, right? So, thanks, Mako, for reminding me. So, yeah, you're gonna see very differing opinions, right? And you guys, can you guys see these two slides here? Tell me what you see on this slide. Like, do these people think America is a Christian nation?
They do not.
And it says no, okay. Obviously from the Christians against Christian nationalism, right?
that walking off a cliff cartoon it says it all.
Right. So these people that would you know, these kind of books or these kind of ideas, they would say like, okay, people that say America is a Christian nation are like, follow me, but they're following you off a cliff, right?
Into a pool of heavenly delight.
You know, bowing toward Babylon. So this is the idea of thinking of America as like similar to Babylon, which is which was a you know, if you know anything in the scriptures, Babylon is used symbolically for like just evil, right? Kind of like sometimes people think of like Las Vegas, the sin city, you know. Okay. So America as Babylon, you know, I mean, you have these kind of ideas. Okay, this is one idea, one.
But we're in exile.
Right? The myth of the Christian nation, right? See things like that, right? On this one, it says the dangerous rise of Christian nationalism, okay? So you guys get this picture? Not if you're with me, okay? And then this one is very different, okay? Tell me if you've seen stuff like this before, you know? Like, has anyone seen things like a Bible that's like wrapped in an American flag, you know? Or like, I thought this one was really interesting, you know, the Jesus rolling up his sleeve, like with his muscles rippling.
Yeah. In today's Washington Post, they had an article, Sarah Bailey had an article about patriot churches.
Patriot churches, yeah. Churches that are popping up that's saying, you know, if you come to our church, you'll become a more of a, you know, American patriot, right? You know, you have the Christian flag with a cross, and then America, a shining city upon a hill. That's actually based off, if you guys remember when we had a conversation with Anthony Ramos, he shared about that verse, right? A city shining on a hill. Like when we're involved in politics, we should be the light of the world. So we want to be visible, right? In the way we are involved in the world, and people to be able to see something different about it, right? But, you know, and so, but these people would say that America is a city shining upon a hill. Yeah, is that the case? Okay. So, you know, there's things like this verse, blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. So if we follow, like America is that nation whose God is the Lord, right? And Marquise and I actually were just talking about this a little bit before Lynette jumped on. And, you know, we were talking about, well, you know, I'm not going to jump in because Marquise, you might be able to say some of those things later. And I don't want to steal your thunder, Mako, so I'll let you share. But I want to first, before we hand it off to you, I want to just really quickly see if one of us could read your bio for the rest of us. So does anyone want to volunteer?
I can read it when I'm eating snacks. Mako Nagasawa grew up in California, studied engineering and public policy in college, and while working at Intel, engaged in Spanish-speaking ministry with Mexican immigrants in East Palo Alto for 6 years. After marrying Ming in May 1999, they moved to Boston. They have lived for the last 20 years with children John and Zoe in an intentional community house in the Black and Brown neighborhood of Dorchester.
Dorchester.
Since 2001, he has done ministry on college campuses. In 2014, he founded the Anastasis Center. Anastasis Center.
You got it, Amy.
I saw the accent. Otherwise, I would have said Anastasis. Where he creates free resources about Jesus, the Bible, restorative justice, and early church history. With his family, he worships at Neighborhood Church of Dorchester. Dorchester. He is involved in many grassroots efforts. He enjoys food, tea, and stories from around the world. He misses the Pacific Ocean. Sorry.
I really do. Yeah.
So besides telling us about Is America a Christian Nation from your perspective and your story, you also have to tell us why you missed the Pacific Ocean and all that. But yeah, looking forward to hearing from you. And then, hopefully we can interact with you too a little bit more.
Oh, yeah. So I missed the Pacific Ocean because I grew up in Los Angeles, going to the beach, hanging out on the beach. Some of my favorite memories are with friends on my swim team when we went to the beach during the summer, and I learned body surfing from my swim coach, and then anyway, and then we actually went to Australia, and I saw the Pacific Ocean from another vantage point, which was amazing. So being in Boston, the Atlantic Ocean can be nice, but it has nowhere near like the power and the beauty, the waves, the activity, the crashing on rocks and things like that. It's boring. So from my standpoint, so I do miss the Pacific in that sense. Yeah. So should I just jump in?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So, it's great to be with you guys. I really appreciate the chance to hang out with you all in Philadelphia. I hope that I could come visit, sometime when we're COVID free. And tonight, Jeremy and I had talked about this topic. It's a topic that is really interesting to me. I think it's different people are really passionate about it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share 5, little stories, and there are kind of moments in my life, and I hope that it becomes a little clear, like what were my thoughts and what were the kind of questions that I had to engage as I was wrestling with this question: is America a Christian nation? I mean, we hear different things about it, as Jeremy said, and as we've been talking about a little before. So first little story, my coming to Jesus, right? Like that was in late high school for me, my junior year of high school. And my parents were not Christians. My dad was kind of an agnostic atheist type, and my mom was semi-Buddhist. Like she had sent me to Buddhist Sunday or Saturday school, had exposed me to Buddhist temple services and things like that when I was growing up. So, they're both Japanese, and so my mom had that kind of cultural background. My dad really loved math and science, and so really he thought that science was like, it makes faith kind of doubtful. Not totally sure about that, but kind of doubtful. But when I came to Jesus, the question that my dad asked me was, why were so many white Christians in favor of the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II? Right, and he had been 6 years old when that started. So, it was hugely. Are you?
Yeah, I was wondering if you could kind of explain, because I just recently had heard about the internment, so some of us might not know what that is.
Yeah, sure. So in during World War II in 1941, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor in Hawaii and blew up some of the U.S. naval fleet that was stationed there. And Japan had been that was its empire building phase when it wanted to control parts of China, Korea, the Pacific Ocean, and so it saw the United States as a threat, and sided with Nazi Germany and the Axis powers, right? Mussolini in Italy. So So the Japanese at that time was opposed to the Allies, and the United States was still kind of indecisive about whether they were going to jump into World War II. And so when the Imperial Japanese fighter planes bombed and kamikaze bombed the naval base in Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, the United States said, like, we are declaring war, we're entering the war. And a couple months later, well, actually pretty soon afterwards, President Roosevelt declared Executive Order 9066, which said, you know, all people of Japanese descent on the West Coast, not Hawaii, mind you, but the West Coast, need to be evacuated into these incarceration camps. Either that, or they need to move like farther east, like to Chicago, right? So everyone has to like leave their businesses, probably sell their homes, you know, unless they had friendly white neighbors who promised to take care of their homes and look after these places. There was nothing they can do. So they just lost their jobs, they lost their livelihoods, homes, and networks, and you know, my dad and his family, he was 6 years old, you know, they boarded a train and eventually got to Heart Mountain, Wyoming, where the government had built this basically series of shacks, right? And it was pretty cold. It gets pretty cold there in the winter, and there was barbed wire fence with posts, you know, guards on posts, with rifles, and you know, you aren't supposed to go near the fence and blah blah blah. So that lasted for the duration of the war, so from 1942 to 1945, and the impact afterwards was also hard, because my grandparents then had to make their way back on precious little money, and they eventually got back to Los Angeles about a year later, and had to find someone to loan them money, and they restarted a small hotel business. And that's, you know, that's what my dad had to do. He spent his high school days coming home from school and then plunging toilets, right, as they were trying to take care of this area. And I believe that was in Skid Row. It's a pretty tough area. Today, it was maybe not quite as violent, but definitely poor, you know, around the time my dad was growing up. So anyway, it was a huge disruption in the lives of about 110, 120,000 Japanese Americans. And something similar happened to Aleutian Islanders up in Alaska, because the American military took over their island homes and they put them in the mainland. So it was really, really hard. It was deemed a violation of constitutional rights and stuff. So, but anyway, my dad's point when I became a Christian was, why did so many Christians actually support that? Because, you know, by the time I was in high school, I mean, public opinion had really turned. I think at around that time, like, you know, the United States government had formally apologized, and in another few years they would give reparations checks of $20,000 to every survivor, which is convenient that it came, you know, over 40 years later, but because a lot of people had died. And, you know, it wasn't enough to cover lost wages, but it was one of those gestures, right, like that are kind of meaningful as far as the United States is concerned, because that's one of the few things that the government has apologized for. And so anyway, so, you know, by the time my dad and I were having this conversation, it was pretty obvious that was a huge mistake, and both legally, morally, and practically, because very few, I mean, Japanese Americans were overt sympathizers with Japan, and even if they were, what could they do, right? I mean, they had no cell phones back then. You know, what are you going to do? And you know, the United States was also fighting Nazi Germany and fascist Italy. What did they do to Germans and Italians? Nothing remotely similar. So anyway, so when my dad asked, I thought, and told me a few stories of like he had visited, he remembers visiting churches where he felt a kind of hostility from white Protestants, and asked me like, well, what's up with that? If America is a Christian nation, then was that a Christian act? Right? I mean, is being a Christian nation just kind of a label that we put on the United States every once in a while? Or how is there a Christian way to incarcerate people and treat minority groups? Is that okay? And especially during wartime, is that a Christian thing to do? So, I didn't have answers at that point. It seemed somewhat obvious to me, like, well, at the very least, that wasn't a Christian thing to do. So Christians can make mistakes. But anyway, fast forward a couple years, and I go to college at Stanford, and this is kind of the second story. My sophomore year of college, in 1991-92, there was the Rodney King beating by white. Rodney King's the black man. He was one of the first black people who was videotaped when white police officers were just totally brutalizing him. And later, in a few months, the white police officers were exonerated and acquitted in a trial. And at that point, the entire city of Los Angeles erupted in flames. And there was tensions between Korean American, Black American, and white American communities in Los Angeles. And since I'm from LA, I just hung on every newscast radio show that I could, spare the time to listen to late at night. And again, I was really wondering, like, is this, are we a Christian country? Is America a Christian nation? What is this an indication of? And now today we have lots more examples of police brutality and evidence that this is a systemic pattern. But back then I was beginning to wake up to that. And as a response, on campus, there's a lot of discussions happening about this. And I read, probably for the first time, at least seriously, the writings of Martin Luther King Jr. and Fannie Lou Hamer, and they were very Christian, and they were very for civil rights and equal rights, right, between all citizens, and even like human rights in general, which would go beyond civil rights. And they anchored their language in both image of God ideas, right? Like, hey, every human being is made in the image of God. That's what Genesis teaches. So we owe each other a certain kind of respect, and before the law, equal treatment. And then also, of course, Martin Luther King in his March on Washington, great civil rights speech, said, he's quoting Abraham Lincoln, who quoted the Declaration of Independence, like all men, or and it was all men at the time, and it had to become all women, inclusively later at the 19th Amendment. But the idea that all people are created equal, well, that was at least originally, Christian idea. No one that I knew, and I like history, in the ancient world, really said that very strong, at least very clearly and very strongly. It was the Christian community who said, hey, we're all equal before God, and that's got to mean something in terms of how we love our neighbors, but also how we treat each other in public space. So that felt like, okay, this is getting deeper, right? Like there are at least Christian elements in, the United States founding, and even though we could also say that the United States has deeply resisted the Christianity that it was called to, like at every step of the way. One other example that comes up from my college days was really appreciating Roger Williams, who founded Providence, Rhode Island, because Roger Williams was the first abolitionist. He lived at the time in the 1620s, 1630s, and he was a governor. He founded Providence by buying land fairly from the Native Americans, right? Like, can you believe that? Like he was friendly with them, like the Narragansett and all the tribes in New England. He was a linguist by training, and so he loved to learn the languages. He wrote a book that honored them and explained their culture and languages to an English-speaking audience. And he also said, like, what it means to be a Christian is to welcome people, basically, and give folks human rights without theocracy. And the theocracy means, like, technically rule by God, but when Christians use it, often it means rule by Christians. So, could you set up a human rights platform without a theocracy? And he was responding to the folks in Boston, the Puritans, John Winthrop and others, who came up with that language of, that way of applying the phrase city on a hill to, like, hey, we're a covenanted political community. This nation is going to be blessed by God, and things like that. But what it meant for the Puritans in Boston was, we got to keep those heathen out. And by heathen, they were referring to Native Americans. And John Winthrop himself, who was a minister, held 3 people as slaves. They were Pequot. So you had to be Puritan in order to live in this community. If you didn't, you had to be an outsider. They called outsiders heathen. If you're a Native American who wanted to become Christian, you had to adopt English ways, right? It's not just enough to accept Jesus, you have to accept Puritan English culture. Roger Williams said, no, that's all wrong. I do want people to know Jesus, but they don't have to adopt English ways, right? And we could coexist, even, like, with cultural differences, but we have to love each other, right? And so there was these 2 competing visions of what it meant to be Christian in North America, and to be a colony, at least. And Roger Williams was really the founder of what we would now call the First Amendment, right, of the United States, freedom of worship and religious conscience, especially. He helped set up the first Baptist church in America. He helped lay the groundwork for the first Jewish synagogue to be founded in Rhode Island. And so it's just a religiously tolerant place and welcoming place. So I came to really appreciate that, and thought, well, that would be interesting, right? What does it mean to be a Christian nation is to actually welcome people who are not Christians. Now, and to make space for them and to honor them, right? And so, here I am chasing those kinds of thoughts too. So that's vignette number 2. Those are some thoughts in college. The next little story, it's kind of odd, but it's the impeachment of President Bill Clinton, in like 98, 99. And the reason why that was interesting to me, and why it made me think, was because I am Japanese American. And in most cultures, it's not easy basically to tell someone who's your elder, I think you're doing a bad job. Right? I mean, that's just a touchy thing to say. I've tried telling my parents that, like, it hasn't gone well. And so so as I was watching this unfold, I was like, impeachment. Wow. I mean, how did Americans get this idea that you can impeach like the highest official in your country, and tell him or her that you're doing a bad job. Like, we get to remove you. And in the end, they impeached him, but didn't convict him in the Senate and that kind of thing. But I traced back that idea. You know what the idea comes from? It actually comes from Christian faith, because it was a particular application of a Christian idea that leaders are accountable to standards. And if they didn't live up to those standards, the community could remove them. So you find that in like 1 Timothy 5, when Paul is talking to Timothy and says, like, there may be sad occasions where you have to remove an elder. And there's a second century document, Christian document, called the Epistle of Polycarp to the Philippians, where they actually did that. The Philippians removed one of their elders. Get this, for greed. Imagine if we actually did that here in the States. But they did it. and essentially there was a kind of character-based meritocracy, right? Like, leaders are accountable to certain standards that they agree on, and then the agreement is, right, it's right there in the scriptures, like, hey, if they don't live up to this, then the community could remove them. And that got applied basically in England under Christian influence, in the Magna Carta, basically an informal understanding that the English nobles could impeach ministers of the king if they were like not doing right, or if the king overstepped the bounds and stuff. They could impeach a minister of the king, not the king himself, but they could do that. And then when 500 years later, the American colonists write out the Constitution, and they're scratching their heads. We don't want a king, so what are we going to do? Well, let's apply the principle of impeachment to really any official, but including the president. And so impeachment actually is a very Christian idea. Like in the ancient world, classical world, I don't think you'd see stuff like that, right? Like, you might assassinate a ruler that you didn't like, but there was no formal process to like kick him or her out of office. And culturally, you just couldn't even imagine it. Could you imagine, like, well, anyway, so that actually was a moment. Another moment, the fourth story here, is about immigration. So I lived in a Mexican, as my little bio says, in East Palo Alto, California. And in the early 90s, it had the highest per capita murder rate out of any city in the nation. And I went to go live there because I was being mentored by Jose and Jennifer Espinosa. They had a Spanish-speaking Bible study. I speak some Spanish. I play guitar, so I was helping out by leading worship for the Spanish-speaking Bible study. So I was learning a lot about this community and the beautiful stories and people in this community, their struggles, and I learned a lot about issues of immigration. And I learned just how complex it was. I also learned just all the horrible things that the United States has done to Mexico, to a lot of Central American countries that are suffering now, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, right, controlling their land, supporting dictators, and driving instability that drives migrants, that drives people to migrate to the United States. So, obviously I have a lot of thoughts about that, but the question also came up, is America a Christian nation in this regard? Is there a Christian way to say no to people who want to come here, right? Especially refugees and asylum seekers. Is there a Christian way to say no to that? Because as far as I can tell, like, the church is supposed to be a community that welcomes anyone who comes. I think that, in the book of Acts, when the Holy Spirit comes in Acts 2 and Pentecost and speaks in all these languages and clearly claiming people of every tongue and tribe and all of that. Like there's both this outward movement and an inclusive movement of saying, hey, let's welcome folks. So, you know, a nation, and that kind of stuck in my mind, and that does play a helpful role for me, because I came to think, well, that's a real difference between a nation and a church, right? Like the church, between the church and the nation. The church is always meant to welcome. The nation, I mean, could say no, and whether it's right to say no, I don't know, right? Like, do island nations have a right to refuse, to limit immigration to their country? I mean, maybe. You know, there are questions like that, and so again, it may not be simple to answer, but it did seem like, okay, at this point, the church and the nation, they seem like two different things on some level, right? And so, you know, that's one of the ways in which I've answered this question of, well, I think there are certainly Christians within a nation, but I don't know what it actually means to be a Christian nation, right? Like, they're just issues like this that come up a lot, right? Not just on immigration, but like going to war. Is there a way that Christians should go to war? I don't know. I don't think so. And I can imagine. And are there ways that that Christians should run, you know, from the US, especially like Wall Street and the Federal Reserve and the world banking system? Like, is there a Christian way to charge interest to the rest of the world, under which nations are struggling, right, with debt? Like, is there a Christian way? Well, I don't know. It doesn't seem like it to me. Or the way like the United States controls basically oil and all these things. Like, well, I don't know that that's a Christian thing to do. So that really came home to me when 9/11 happened, right, in 2001. And actually, I want to throw Hurricane Katrina in there, because there were certain things that some Christians said that really I couldn't bring myself to agree with. Like after 9/11, some very prominent white evangelical leaders said, you know, the Twin Towers fell because of gay people in the United States. And I thought, well, that's a really bad connection to make. Like, I don't see at all why you're saying that. I mean, the terrorists themselves, that's not their explanation for why they did that, right? Their explanation is like, look, you've been on Saudi soil and holy land, you've had military bases on Islamic communities, and all the, you know, that was their reason. I don't know why we're reinterpreting this all of a sudden. And then after Hurricane Katrina, you know, the levees broke, the parts of the cities were flooded, and again, as kind of the same group of white evangelical leaders said, well, this is happening because the city of New Orleans is so sinful, and especially the French Quarter, right? Like, you have Mardi Gras and all these things. And I'm like, really? Is that why? Because the French Quarter was dry. It was dry. You know who got flooded? The lower Ninth Ward and parts of the upper Ninth Ward, which is the poorest and most African American communities. Like, why is it that you're just kind of overlooking some of these details? And I realized, well, part of it is because I think when some people think of the United States as a Christian nation, right, like then there are certain things that they interpret as like, well, if this happens to us as a nation, then it must be because it's somehow similar to Israel in the Old Testament, right? Like, God would do things to Israel as a nation, bless them or not bless them, make them vulnerable to other things. And I thought, I thought we were done with that period of the story, right? Like we're not part of the story of Israel. We enter in at the point of Jesus and his disciples, and he brought the story of Israel to a climax, and Israel was there in order to be the family and the community for Jesus to redeem human nature. And now that Jesus has come, like, I don't think God deals with nations like that. So that changes things, and changes how I interact with Scripture. So let me stop there. And I know Jeremy and I were wanting to have a little bit of Q&A, but I hope that's kind of helpful as 5 little stories or milestones in my thinking that helped me to think through that question.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Maybe, and as you guys think about your thoughts and questions, I mean, it doesn't really have to be exactly like, I know that whenever someone shares, people have all kinds of things that jumble up. So don't feel weird if what you talk about even isn't that clear of a question yet, because this isn't about we're a small group and this is just about interacting with each other. But something I notice is like, I think, how do you feel like I've noticed, I think some people look back at the good old days, when you think about like, well, when I grew up in America, things weren't like this. Like, we didn't have, we weren't so divided. We didn't have these George Floyd, whatever, right? We didn't have, and then just name the things that people don't like about America now. And America, and that's because we did these things, when it comes to things that people associate with God in the Bible. Like we took out prayer in schools. We stopped honoring, and I think there's a sense in which when I hear that, it connecting the dots that way, where it's like we left God, and so God left us to, these bad things that are happening to us now. I mean, there's some sense in which it seems to make a lot of sense when people say that, and because I do see that in scripture, the idea of like when you go off the path, that's good. You turn away from God's ways, you turn away from his truth, you turn away from his, just the things he tells us to do, right? Because he tells us how to live in a way that's good for us, that's God honoring, but also good for us. When we go off that path, we're going towards our own destruction, right? I mean, it seems to make sense in the Bible. So I hear that when people say that, and yeah, I mean, I guess that's the sense of like, well, we were more Christian, now we're less, and this is why all these bad things happen. Like, does that make sense? Do you see that? Do you empathize with that feeling, and how would you kind of interact with someone that says those things,
Yeah. Well, I mean, it may depend on who exactly I'm talking to. If someone really is ready to engage, then I would on issues of power and who exactly was it good for, in whose memory was it good, then I would ask those questions, right? Like, this is the kind of thing where my dad's story and his question to me about why were Christians in favor of the incarceration of Japanese Americans, that lends itself to white American Christians thinking this is a good thing because it ensures our security, and yet, or our sense of peace of mind, or we don't have to look at our neighbors as if they're going to stab us in the back somehow. But, oh, hi, who's that? We have a very young student here with us. But anyway, that was a very cute baby, and I just totally lost my train of thought. But I would say yes. There is a dynamic of, hey, there is kind of a, a a fruit of the spirit that becomes, like evident in the community or in the circles in which you are. And so of course there, peace is one of them, but on some level, like, it has to be rooted in truth. Now I would say that there tend to be two particular things that that many American Christians associate with the blessings of God, and that is political liberty, like the ability to do the maximum number of things, and then also capitalism, right? Because capitalism enables people to buy the maximum number of things, and also to escape the most consequences if you are the one in control of a business that can pollute, for example. Like, you can get away with stuff, or you could get away with treating your workers badly. So, that type of that, if that's what people are thinking, this is the blessing of God, right? Like that I get to do as much as possible, and I'm interfered with the least, like no regulations, no laws telling me what to do, and like lower taxes. Is that really what God says is a blessing, or is the blessing of God found in the quality of relationships, right? The quality of relationships, where where I'm contributing to other people are contributing to me, and we participate in one another's lives. That's much more of the New Testament focus. And it is, I don't think the New Testament says, look, the things that you think are blessings from God, like, well, I don't think that it is. So that's how I would answer that question.
Yeah, the last part you're saying reminds me of kind of a lot of people around the world criticize Americans as very individualistic. So
Right.
we're very focused on ourselves, and I want my own rights, my individual freedoms. And some people would think of that as American, think of that as Christian, but you're saying in the Bible, the book of Acts, they're all living in a communal way that's not very individualistic, right?
Right. And when Paul says in First Corinthians, like, well, if there's a long backstory to this, but if he's like, if I eat meat and that messes someone else up, then I won't eat meat, right? That's the kind of there's a quality of relationship that is Christian, and a quality of character that is lived for others, and in that I find personal fulfillment. Yes, that is true, but it's not about maximizing my own liberty. That is not Christian.
I like those questions. Like, is there a Christian way to say no to immigrants? The Canadian way would just be no, thank you, instead of just no. But
Right.
yeah, or is there a Christian way to go to war? The Canadian way would be to say, sorry, we're going to kill you now. But yeah, I guess what I was thinking about was one of our friends who came as a Syrian refugee and just had a horrible experience here and went back to Syria. So maybe the
Wow.
maybe the Christian thing to do would have been did I share too much?
Oh, no, it's fine.
Just say, like,
That's a stunning indictment of
yeah,
whatever her experience was. That just sounds very unfortunate.
the Christian thing maybe would have been to be very, very transparent and say, hey, maybe you won't like it because you might be making $8.50 an hour, and it's really hard to live this way, and you might also struggle with access to services, or you might struggle with figuring things out, if or just I don't know. So yeah, I mean, I was thinking about that, and just also another video we watched in this group last fall about just Iranian Christian women who maybe sought refuge from persecution, but then realized their faith vitality of faith just struggled, so just desired to go back to where they were, in spite of the physical suffering or the other circumstances, but just so maybe I was just thinking about, like, is this a Christian nation? A lot of nations would probably, or a lot of Christians in other parts of the world would probably say no, based on our lifestyle values.
Because they have such strong faith, even amidst persecution and suffering. But Americans, we are so fragile about if the smallest thing is taken away from us. That's what you're saying, right?
Right, and I've heard of other countries sending missionaries to the United States, even from very, very impoverished parts of Africa, like the church praying for us, or praying for American Christians to, I guess, break up, or to value God more, or and it's
yes. Yeah, here in Boston, there's an Anglican church that rolls up under the Archbishop of Rwanda, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And they're a mission. They're a missionary church to the United States.
Mm-hmm. So that's, I guess, wild, or perhaps the upside down kingdom that we follow. But
yeah, maybe. I mean, I'm hearing, Mako, you say Christians were supposed to, it's not about maximizing my freedom and my power, but loving others and giving others freedom and power, But do you feel like when it comes to this whole, is America a Christian nation? I hear the word power in my mind. It's like, do you think that when some people, when they're saying it, it's like, we wish that we were in power as Christians. I guess not everyone thinks that way, but maybe some of us think, I wish that Christians were in power, because if we were in power, like, how do you think about that idea? Like, if we were in power, if Christians were in every sort of, if you take someone who, is religiously Christian, or maybe even is really heartfelt Christian, really prays and really wants to follow God, and and put them in every single position of power in the United States, from mayor all the way up to whatever, right? And like I hear that idea that people think of, like, if we did that, our country would be a good country. We would be in a good place. And part of me understands that, part of me doesn't, because I'm like, well, would that position of power corrupt them? So right. I wonder what you think, right? I wonder what you think about that. Yeah.
That is, I think, the heart of the question. And one series of thoughts about that actually go back to the question of who was more right, John Winthrop or Roger Williams, because it's how they're both Christians, but they thought of the role of policies differently, right? So John Winthrop almost had like magical thinking, right? So that's what I would describe it as. Like, well, if we're all Christian here, and then somehow God would give us really good crops. Um, and never mind about the enslavement of Pequot people and that, but it's about like Christians being in leadership and what we call ourselves. And do we hang the Ten Commandments up in public school, up in schools, that kind of thing. um, you know there I think there are, I know it's a it's a little, to me it seems like magical thinking, like, well, why is it that that will give us the outcomes that we want? Because people are consistently surprised when it doesn't happen. So for instance, many southern states um, have governors and state legislatures that have said we want abstinence only education in schools. And not just in the churches where, okay, I can understand, right? Like in churches, you want to talk about that, but they do sex education in such a way that they don't really talk about mental health, relational health, emotional health. Instead, they just focus on the behavior, and they're like, just don't have sex before marriage. And not only does that lead to, I think, false expectations about what sex in marriage is actually like, it can still be a realm of deep miscommunication and working out of things. And so it just leads to false expectations. But also, like, then you actually there get the highest premarital sex rates. You get the highest unplanned pregnancy rates and high rates of abortion. So it's because they're focusing on kind of a behavioral outcome that they want, that they think that Christian faith approaches things in this really simple way. In reality, right, like it turns out, as far as I'm aware of these studies, um, when we approach young people with the idea that, hey, let's talk about relational health as part of your emotional health and your mental health, right? And let's talk about oxytocin and the bonding hormone, right, that happens when people have sex. And then what happens if you do that and then you break up, or your relationship falls apart, or other hard things happen. Well, there are higher rates of depression associated with that. And so so let's talk about your health. And okay, here's contraception. This is what contraception is. This is the range of things. This is what it's for. This is how you talk about it with other people. If you're going to have sex, this is why it's really important. And also, if you want to be abstinent and make spiritual commitments, that is a perfectly respectable thing to do too, right? That is just a better way of presenting things to young people. And that has been shown, as far as like curriculum in schools go, where it's not explicitly Christian, or you can't be explicitly Christian. That's been shown to lower, unwanted pregnancy rates and abortion. So, you know, that's the kind of question that I would ask. Like, are Christians really being thoughtful? Are we treating people like full human beings? Or are we succumbing to this magical thinking, right? Like, if we just hang the Ten Commandments in the wall of a classroom, like, our problems will be solved? Really? I mean, those kinds of methods tend to be authoritarian, right? That's, because who's in charge, and as long as you follow the rules, then we'll be all fine. Don't reflect too hard on yourself or your feelings. Because what really matters is authority, and whether you follow authority. And that is really detrimental. Arguably, you read Psalms and Proverbs and the Jewish wisdom literature, as well as some parts of the New Testament as well. You don't see, like, Jesus doesn't approach people that way. He's always interested in, like, well, who do you think I am, and who do you think you are? What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to come into relationship with other people? You know, how do you deal with your desires? And those kinds of questions. That's a rich part of Scripture that tends to get underemphasized in favor of this magical thinking. And that's why I contrast it again with Roger Williams, because I feel like he was really thoughtful about what does human free will really mean? And then how do we appeal to people? How do we make space to people just because they're people? And yes, because we're Christian, we want there to be such a thing as human dignity and human rights, and, you know, equal rights for people. And you know, we can even work things out between like English culture and Native American culture. You know, their approach to land, their approach to gender, and stuff like that. There were some differences, and that could have been navigated and negotiated in a framework that is informed by Christians, but you don't have to be explicitly Christian in order to be part of it, be part of that community. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I hear you saying, like, you know, when we think about put someone in power and then use laws to like force people to behave in the right way, you know, where it's like, this is how you should, this is how you shouldn't, versus kind of what I'm imagining as you're talking about this guy, Roger Williams, was, you know, even the way you talked about how he bought the land from them instead of, you know, stealing the land.
Yep.
You know, which, you know, some people would say that makes America not a Christian nation, because at the beginning we just stole the land, right? But you know, I don't want to, you know, that's just a part of the conversation. But, you know, he bought the land, he learned the language, he had this kind of give and take relationship. And you would say that's more reflective of the way of being, influencing people as followers of Jesus, rather than just, you know, get the position of power and force people to live the way that we think that God wants people to live. We want to persuade people, like, you know, evangelism, persuade people with love, right? Help people to see the way we live. And then they're like, oh, wow, I really like that. You know, I really like the way you live. It makes a lot of sense. Tell me more about this God that you believe in. And that kind of process, rather than, well, whether you believe in these 10 commandments or not, we're putting it up here, and, you know, you should believe them, right? That kind of thing.
Right. I mean, there are ways in, you know, for example, justice, like which kind of justice, which principles of justice come first, you know. Is it meritocratic justice, or retributive justice, or restorative justice, or distributive justice, right? Like there's ways to have those conversations, but we don't have to be defensive about it. We don't even necessarily have to be the ones in power in order to persuade people. That, for instance, I would say, yeah, and a big vision of restorative justice, that's the best, and that is the most Christian. I understand not everyone believes that, but or even knows what that means, what I just said, and, you know, we can unpack that at a different time. But it doesn't mean that I have to hide it, and it also doesn't mean that I have to be the one in charge.
Yeah, I mean, that makes me, by the way, Marquise or Lynette or anyone else, feel free to jump in, but that makes me, when you said you don't have to be the one in charge to, persuade, it makes me think about how, you know, one of the people that we respect the most in the New Testament, right, the Apostle Paul, he wasn't any sort of kind of government leader. He didn't have any official power over people.
Yep.
He was, he just persuaded people, right? He went around sharing about Jesus, and somehow gained a hearing. Like it made sense to them. That's the persuasion, right? And then those people really wanted to listen to him afterwards, because they really felt like, wow, you have really transformed my life by, you know, connecting me with Jesus, and now I have the Holy Spirit, and you know, so it was all
Right.
voluntary, right? And it wasn't like this sense of like, and I you know, at the end of it, isn't it? At the end of it, like he gets to stand before kings and share about Jesus, right? And so that's a very different way when it comes to, and I guess, but at the same time, I understand if people want someone in uh, like a political position like that still is good and virtuous and wise, and if
Yeah.
a Christian, even better kind of thing, right? But it's like, but it's not so much like if we just, you know, take the map of all the puzzle pieces of all the political positions and put the Christians in there, it's going to fix things, right? It's more like, well, if God gives us the opportunity and raises us up into that position, great. You know, I think about Joseph, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Bible, Joseph is raised up into that position.
Yep.
But we should be happy about influencing people in loving ways, persuading people wherever we are in life, right? Doesn't matter if you're in the halls of power or
Right.
on the street with people, right? I mean, anyways, I'm just kind of thinking about things out loud in front of you, but that's what you made me think of.
Right. Right. And again, you know, I think when Christians are able to keep more scripture in mind rather than less, you get better outcomes. And here's another example, right? Human trafficking today is a big challenge, and you know, it's even kind of weird to talk about. I'm not a QAnon person, and please stay away from that if you are hearing this and you're at all drawn in. No, I mean, but that's the hook. Having said that, the church developed a really intelligent way of dealing with prostitution and human trafficking, and that was in the 300s. The leaders got together and said, you know what? For a woman to be a prostitute, it's a social sin, but for a man who is her customer or her pimp or her trafficker, right? It's a personal sin. And what they meant is this: it's never desirable to have prostitution, but look, I mean, this is kind of a two-way street here on some level, except there is a power difference. And so we are going to say that a woman who's a prostitute is trapped. She's a victim. And that's what it means for prostitution to be a social sin, because we can think of so many reasons from their own experience of like why a woman might be a prostitute. Maybe she was in poverty, maybe she was blackmailed, maybe she was kidnapped, maybe she was tricked, coerced, or something, threatened or something. Maybe she was abandoned as a girl and raised by someone who trafficked her. So there are all kinds of reasons why that could be and probably is. Maybe even not even in all cases, but we're just going to say that's what we believe is happening. On the other hand, a man who buys sex from a prostitute, that's a personal sin. There's one and only one reason why he does that, and it's always sinful, right? And that is how they proceeded. And today, this is what we call the Nordic countries. That's what they've done. We call it the Nordic progressive model, and it has been shown when we criminalize the buying of sex but not the selling of sex. That is the only actual way to bring down the rate of human trafficking and to actually make it safe for women to report themselves as prostitutes and then come out, right? Because otherwise they would just be incriminating themselves. So, so who thought of that? Well, Christians. Now, you know, but they're having to think of so many different issues and and then put them together into a meaningful policy. And you know, is it going to eliminate prostitution? No, but it will be the only really effective thing to bring down the rate of prostitution. So some of it is like, what are our expectations of Christian faith in a society? Some of it is our expectation of like, what can Christian leaders actually accomplish? How thoughtful do they have to be? I mean, you got to be pretty thoughtful in order to not do harm. Like, there's enough harm already being done.
I wonder. I don't know, Marquise, if you're available to turn the mic, but I mean, it's okay if you don't want to ask the question, but I want to invite you to see if Marquise wanted to ask the question, because we had actually comment earlier before you guys showed up about kind of how America is perceived outside of America. So I don't know, Marquise, if you're there to turn on the mic. Question. Looks like not. Maybe he's preoccupied.
Go ahead. You can ask.
Okay, I'll ask for you. Well, yeah, I mean, well, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm trying to voice what we were talking about, but it was basically this idea that, like, you know, you have like Muslim, you know, countries that we people typically recognize as like Muslim countries, you know, and you have places that people recognize as the secular countries, right? I think what's that country? Albania, right? A lot of people think of it as pretty much a secular country. You know, I think for China has been understood as a communist country, which, you know, they for a long time was basically atheist and now more Christians. But a lot of people from outside the U.S. would view America, right, as a Christian country. And I mean, so how do you feel about it? I mean, like, and you know, that was the comment Marquise made, and like the comment I made on top of that was, and then they associate, like, my understanding, a lot of Muslims associate the kind of immorality in our country, right? Sexual immorality. They see things on TV, Hollywood, and they associate it with America. America is a Christian country, so Christianity is very loose, and, you know, it's just what you see the Hollywood star doing, you know, James Bond or whatever, right? Actually, I guess James Bond isn't in there, but you get the point. So how do we think about that, right? How in the eyes of a lot of other countries, America's a Christian country. Yeah.
I think that's some of the most reason to be self-reflective, right? Because a lot of Muslim countries would say we are the great Satan, not just because of Hollywood, although that's part of it, but because of our military, right? A lot of countries would look at the United States as, you're violent, like you're really violent, not just in terms of what you do militarily in other places, but I mean, Canadians. Amy, are you Canadian? Yeah. So, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the impression that I get is that a lot of Canadians and Brits would say, why are you so violent? And they have theories about it, right? It's like, this goes back to slavery, doesn't it? Like, you're still defending your property. Like, that's just part of the kind of the stories that we tell as Americans. Like, I'm the gun owner, I have to defend my property and defend my home. My home is my castle. And you know, we just learned in the Breonna Taylor case that the castle doctrine, that's called the castle doctrine, and the the stand your ground, and also no-knock warrants by the police. Like, there was a contest, and basically the no-knock warrants won, right? And so but that's to say, like, there's this escalation of violence in the UK. How many police deaths have been? How many deaths have the police caused? 5. Like, it's ridiculously low, because and part of that is because a good part of their police force doesn't even carry guns. And that's because a good part of their population does not carry guns. The thoughts about gun ownership, I mean, gun ownership is really, really restricted there. So yeah, I think that's also something of how we're perceived, right? Like, we're violent, not just internationally, militarily, but domestically, and in our relations with one another, we're violent. I think that is cause for a lot of self-reflection. Like, why do other people see us that way?
Yeah. And this isn't even trying to get into people's opinions. I don't even want to go there because that would probably about gun laws and gun ownership and those kind of things. But
Yep.
but I think it's fair to say, I don't think it's radical to say that I think when a lot of people think of America, I mean the statistics when it came to the school shootings, which
Absolutely.
is really bad, and just kind of how many, what was it, like every month or something like that at one point is a school shooting. And so when it comes to our violence, I think that we as Americans probably acknowledge that. And so it is interesting for you to think about that, for other countries to view us as violent. Even to say America is a Christian nation and Christian is violent, a lot of people view that. The thing that comes to my mind is, I don't think this way, but I hear people thinking, Muslim nations, they're violent. Islam is violent because, and I know that's very tricky because, that would be a whole, like, we can talk about that years from now. I don't think we're ready to talk about that thing, or like maybe we can have other conversations in the future. But like,
right.
But yes, I mean, my point is, I hear people saying Islam equals violence,
Yeah.
which I want to say, hey, let's cover conversation. I think it's more complicated than that. But then when we think about, well, other people think America's a Christian nation. America's very violent. Christianity is violent. I don't want to become Christian. That is that at the end of the day, I care very much that people see Jesus and they want to follow him. And I don't want them to think about Jesus. I don't want to be a stumbling block to prevent people from following Jesus. And so
Absolutely.
that kind of thing makes me uneasy. Right.
Just one other quick thing, a little anecdote about like how other people see us is, there's that joke. If you speak 3 languages, what are you? Trilingual, right? If you speak 2 languages, what are you? You're bilingual. If you speak 1 language, what are you? You're American. And there's that's another perception that is very common outside the U.S. of Americans. And in other, the violence thing is really serious, but that joke actually to me is very serious, because why would America be considered so, like, either a Christian nation or lots of Christians in the nation, and yet this would be the case? Because Pentecost shows us that Christians should be speaking in many languages. And so why are we perceived as like the snobby ones, right? Like, you should come to us. Like, we shouldn't have to work that hard for other people. Like, other people should work hard for us. And I think that is arrogant. I think that's a horrible reputation to have. And and I'm someone who even believes, like, look, we probably should make English a kind of a national language. I know that might surprise some folks on the left, because that tends to be on a right-leaning position, but it's not to denigrate people who speak other languages. It's I would love to see more signage, right? Like public places in Spanish and Vietnamese and in other languages that are pretty common in the US. And so it's not to denigrate people who do speak other languages, or to denigrate immigrants. It's to honor them. Like, we say that people should be entitled to a fair trial by a jury of their peers. Well, how's that going to happen if we don't make our democratic processes accessible to people, and we invest in the learning, in their learning, so they can do that? Like, we need to be able to bring out the best of our democracy, and also bring out the best in one another. And so I think those two things could really go together. And unfortunately, the idea that for whatever reason America is a Christian nation, however it looks, somehow it's always questioned that we would speak English. Like, America is an English-speaking Christian nation. Well, what the heck is that? Why do we even think that? So, pretty soon we're going to be a brown country, and there's so much Spanish-speaking people.
Christians spoke Greek and
Yeah,
you know, and
right.
and
Greek, Aramaic, Syriac, probably some, a few understood Hebrew, right? The ancient languages, probably others. Um,
Egyptian is much closer to Arabic, right? Much more closer in terms of modern languages. So we don't tend to think of, when we hear Arabic, we don't immediately think Christian. We think Muslim, but like now people think about Christian,
right,
I think English, right?
right.
Yeah.
Well, it's not just Americans, it's the British that imported that or exported that too, because when you
Yeah.
go to other countries, you know, they'll ask you, what is your Christian name? Which is essentially, what is your Anglo name?
I know that. Yeah. Well, there's so many things we could talk about, but I also want to kind of like zoom in to like, I know that there's a lot of things rattling around different people's brains, but like, I mean, the question, right, we started out, is America a Christian nation? And we kind of looked at it in a lot of different ways and kind of just, I don't know, our minds are wandering. But I wonder, I've talked a lot, Mako's talked a lot, Amy's talked a little bit. Lynette hasn't really shared much. Marquise chimed in to say, hey, Jeremy, go ahead and ask my question for me. I wonder if Marquise or Lynette has any thoughts that you wanted to kind of like process. You don't have to, but it'd be cool to at least hear some thoughts.
I had thoughts, I just didn't say them.
Lynette, bring it on. What are your thoughts?
Jeremy talks a lot. That's one thought. I love you, Jeremy. It's okay. I mean, there's like different points of the conversation where I wanted to chime in where it was kind of relevant right there. So now I'm kind of like, how do I backtrack? But, and I also have my camera off, so it's not like Jeremy knew that I wanted to speak. But there were, I think, like, overall the conversation was just very interesting, especially like about the Japanese American history part. Like, I enjoyed just learning about history and learning about little things like that. And so I thought that was very interesting. And I just made a friend who is he's half Japanese, half white, and he was kind of telling me that some, like, maybe almost a week ago. So it was kind of interesting to have that come back up. And then I, with what you just said about the English, I think, I mean, I'm the type of person that's like, more languages the better, which
Yeah.
makes sense. I think that I think for me, I personally, living in America, do not think that America is a Christian country. And I think of that as an outsider too, as a person who knows a lot of immigrants, as a person who advocates for a lot of immigrants. I think that that is also true for them. They come here with this, I mean, the first slide with like the false hope is like Christian country, all that like negativity. I kind of see that a lot as an American. I think that I think that there are so many people who want to say that they're Christian, but don't follow in Jesus's footsteps. They just say it just to say it because it's acceptable, because it's what you're supposed to do.
Right.
And I think that, and me, I wasn't born Christian. So I have a better understanding of what it's like to be a Christian and not be a Christian.
Yeah.
So you know, just like you, I found Christ in my high school years, and I think that it kind of makes you appreciate the culture and the way that Jesus is more. I think that we are supposed to walk in his footsteps. We are supposed to be the light, and there's just so much around us that just isn't. It's a lot of darkness, especially in America. And I feel like outside countries, they see this like this veil that we cover ourselves with as that hope, promised land, things like that. But then they actually set foot, they break that bubble, and they're just like, whoa, this is not what I was expecting. And I think that it's very sad. And I kind of learned that. I think like my family has always said that, like, always go on to do bigger, better things. They've always pushed me to be better, to do better, to go find better, and that there's better in the world and in America, uh per se. But you know, it's just, where do you find it? It's I think for me, a lot of people have that perception still, but I have I have been discriminated against. Like, I've been told to go back to my country, but well, one, I'm Puerto Rican, so this technically is my country because they own my country. And then like, people just like are just, they don't understand, they don't know culture. America doesn't have a culture to me. There's no culture. It's kind of just up in the air, and you are whatever you are, and there's your group, and you just have to find it. I think that we're very separated, we're very divided, and I mean, just learning about history, American history in general, I think that we've always been divided. There are people who do say that, like earlier you were talking about the good old times, Jeremy. Like, there are people who are like that, but it's because they weren't part of that divided I guess.
Yep.
Like, they weren't in the backlash. They weren't the ones being ridiculed. And so I think that that's why there are a lot of people who do think like that. And then there are a lot of people who are on the other side that are like, you know, I don't even want to be here anymore. Like, they come here to go find their dreams and live a better life. Um, but then they end up like going back to where they came from, or they stay here because where they, like, the part that they were from, they couldn't really get out of, and that was a terrible place, so they rather be here even if they don't like it. And unfortunately, their friend went back to his country because of something like that.
Yeah.
And that happens often
Yeah.
because of this false hope that we picture ourselves to be. I feel like, I was even thinking about it, even like Americans think of the littlest things, just the littlest things, uh, to glamorize. We do a lot of that. Glamorizing is a lot of what we do. I mean, I was thinking about it, like, in other countries. I was watching like a commercial. I was at my grandma's house yesterday, and it was like an infomercial about some teeth whitening thing. And I just was like, only Americans. You go to other countries, you go to Russia, they don't care about your teeth. They, like, you go to like other countries, and they're not sitting there like, oh, your teeth have to be straight and white and perfect. Like, yeah, you can get veneers and different things in those countries, but it's because of American standard, this perfectionism, things like that. And it's just, I think that it's a very sad thing. But people, I mean, the glamorization of it all is, I mean, is meant to be seen as beautiful, but then it's kind of like it's kind of just a mask. Like, underneath it, what are you really? And I feel like living in America, that's what I experience every day. Underneath it all, what are we as a nation really?
When the veneers fall off, you just have little pegs stuck in your gut.
She says as a dentist, just to give some context. That's why she knows all this.
That is awesome, Amy.
Oh, Marquise, do you have anything to chime in? Feel free to say no.
Do you, how do you feel about America being I guess theorized as Babylon, or the new Babylon, which is in Revelation? How do you feel about that? What are your thoughts, or anybody's thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I guess I think that Babylon was a representation of not just one nation, but just a dynamic, like the rest of the world, really. And so, is the United States part of Babylon? Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that fits there. Is it the only manifestation of Babylon? I don't think that. I think there are other ways that gets expressed. So, yeah.
Maybe could we say, to the extent that like Babylon in the Bible, using imagery like Babylon's like very violent, it's very greedy. It's very what?
Opulent.
It's very like Lynette was saying, it's surface. It's all surface. Opulent. It's all about wealth and displaying wealth. It's very I think the language of a harlot, which is like it's just a mess, right? Immorality, Sin City. You oppress the poor, that kind of stuff, right? It's just kind of like, to the extent that America is like that, we can say that yes, America is Babylon. To the extent that America has, because Mako, you mentioned people that have had this amazing part of American history, right?
Yeah.
To the extent that America has this kind of, you talk about human rights, right? It sounds like a lot of that was championed, early on, like the extent that we have followed Jesus, not just in name, but in his values, in the way of life, in terms of dignifying our neighbors, in terms of laying down our lives for others, then we're not Babylon, right? Isn't that,
Sure. Yeah, that's a great distinction, because Christians have a kind of dual citizenship, I guess, is what you're saying. So we could certainly make mistakes, but we could also express something about God's kingdom. It's just that God's kingdom, again, in my view, is not bound up just with a nation. It always has to be relived and re-expressed, and and flowing out of a real dynamic relationship with the Holy Spirit, and we show a little bit of the New Jerusalem. We're little signposts, right? Like to another city, the truly eternal city that God has in mind, where the streets, the wall, the people are like, in, I believe it's Revelation 21, transparent like pure gold and clear glass, which is interesting, right? Because pure gold is not transparent, and yet both pure gold and clear glass have been through the fire. We are purified by Jesus's Spirit, and that's why we're signposts. Institutions matter in the sense that they, like what we set up, but they're not the same thing. It's the people living out of Christ's love.
And maybe, Marquis, another thought to add on to that. I'm going to show what I think. When it comes to this question, is America, I'm more uneasy saying America is a Christian nation than I am uneasy saying American is Babylon. That's me personally. I understand that people would argue that there were a lot of Christians that came over, from the UK, from England and stuff over here, escaping persecution. A lot of Christians, but they didn't all agree on stuff. But so people would argue that it was a Christian nation because of that, and certain other things that you mentioned, Mako. But I am more uneasy saying that I would rather say America is closer to Babylon, But hey, by the way, it's not. That's not exactly right. We have to be careful. There's a lot of good that God in our midst, you know. But I am more worried that, you know, to say America is Babylon to me is inexact, you know. But to say America is a Christian nation, I don't see it as just, oh, that's a little inexact. I'm actually really worried when we say that, you know, because I think that a lot of the stuff we've been talking about, right? It's kind of like grasping for power and.
What if you, something I hear is like, America's a Christian nation that has fallen away, or like America's a Christian nation that is in need of revival?
Yeah, even there, Mako, feel free to jump in, but for me, I'm still uneasy about that. I would say we have fallen away for sure, and we want to seek revival as the body of Christ, but I don't think America as a whole has ever been Christian, or like, I think those of us who do confess Christ, we really need to be revived, and we need to, like, maybe like Lynette saying, when it comes to like being so surfacey, we need to stop being so surface. We need to be less the way we think about money, being so individualistic. We need to, all of that. We need to follow Jesus again. And I do think that it would have a positive effect on society in America.
We need to be more like the Native Americans.
I don't know what you guys.
Yeah, I mean, ecologically.
Right, when it comes to how we relate to the earth. Marquise, is that, how would you respond to that? Is America more like Babylon?
I mean, to be honest, I really don't know. I would say that because, like what Lynette was saying earlier, how there's a lot that America is known for, rather than, like, America is known for, how should I say it? Is known for being who you want to be, however you want to be it, rather than being a nation that's based off of Christian footsteps, or, you know, ideas and stuff like that, you know. So it swings more towards I could be who I want to be, whenever I want, how I want, and land of the free, you know. So America is really seen as that rather than anything else, you know. So this is why I say it just leans more towards being like Babylon than anything else, you know, because of that, you know. And like Michael was saying, like, you know, I know God doesn't necessarily like judges uh his people based on nations, like, you know, uh uh geographic nations, but nations as his children, spiritual people. But at the same time, you know, Babylon is a nation. You know, it could be anything. You know, it could be a group of people. It could be an area in the world. But Babylon is and it's an area. You know, it's an area. It's a location. It's a place. You know, so there is a place in Scripture that's referred to as Babylon. You know, so what is that place? Uh, we don't know. We don't know yet, because, you know, the day has not come. But it seems a lot of it points towards America because of, well, a lot of people say it points to America. I haven't really, you know, I just go by what some people said, and, you know, it makes sense. But I haven't really dived deeper to have my own interpretation about it. But I just go by, you know, what other people, you know, usually, you know, are convinced of. But they have some convincing ideas about America being bad because of, you know, stuff like this, and, you know, the same claims they make about America, they put towards the Vatican. So that could be Babylon. Who knows? You know, nobody knows, you know. But as far as it being a Christian nation, any nation can be a Christian nation if it's Christians in it, but I don't like, like Michael was saying earlier, like America was based off of Christian, like ideas and Christian, just Christian motives and stuff like that, rather than like any other country, so yeah, like I kind of almost resonate with Amy said, like America is like a Christian nation that is falling away, but at the same time, uh, America is just America, so it really can't. America is just America with Christian ideas, even freaking Trump, not Trump, that's not, but even that's why I said even people in power place their hand on the Bible just to for what? Like what is I don't why do people put their hands on the Bible? Like it doesn't I don't know. Like, they do that in the in England, they swear in the Bible and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't know how to go about that, but yeah, I don't know.
If I can chime in before you do, Mako, I would say this is definitely why we see this as an initial beginning of conversation. And, maybe you're like, well, we were recording this, so maybe you're like, man, I really want to go back. He said something, I'm like, this is really interesting. And to go back and think about it, because it's a lot to reflect on. Like Lynette was saying, learning history, that helps, because we can't really, for those who would argue that America is a Christian nation, it was founded on Christian principles. Well, how do you really know how to talk about that unless you actually go and figure it out yourself? Like, was it or wasn't, And I think, Mako, you're trying to say it's mixed. It wasn't black or white, that it was founded on Christian principles. It wasn't founded on Christian principles. Some, like Roger Williams, seemed to do it in what you would say is a more Christian way. The Puritans in Boston, you feel like is not starting America off in the right way. Like,
that's right.
So maybe where we end up is it's okay not to have a black or white answer to say, is America a Christian nation? Yes or no. Maybe that's just a good question just to jump off conversation. Well, since you asked that question, what do you think about the Japanese internment camp? So I don't know how you would feel about that way of approaching it, Mako.
Sure. I mean, I think the question of, well, there are different kind of origin stories or points that are real. Like there are different genuine, different communities that are kind of gathered up, but also kind of invisibilized, right? Like when we talk about the United States, and essentially when you get down to like for example, the John Winthrop Roger Williams contrast, like, well, which Christianity are we talking about? Like who's more faithful in their expression of Christianity, and therefore who are we going to choose, like, to emulate? And as you've guessed, or you could tell, like I'm totally behind Roger Williams. There may be a few others, but yeah, but it is mixed, and that's why I think, for myself, I find it more accurate to say Christians have always played a role in this nation. But you look at the Constitution and it's like, yeah, okay, endowed by their creator, great. Impeachment, great. 3/5 compromise, not so great.
Right, just that was when it came to viewing slaves, black slaves, as 3/5 of a human being, right? Yeah.
Right, and that's just for population counting purposes, so you get representation in Congress, right? Like, it's not that every 5 black people had 3 votes. That's just not even the case.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. I mean, I want to, let me say it this way. I know that it's been a lot, and this isn't kind of a thing that will be like, oh, I figured it out, but it's a conversation that I thought would be a really good one to kick off. I thought also because we're in this season leading up to the election, And people throw around words like that, you know, oh, we're a Christian nation. Oh, we've lost our Christianity. We got to come back. And okay, we've had this conversation now. Hopefully it'll help us think through some of these things better. But it's got to be something that we think about these kind of things for a long time. So we can't try to solve it all tonight. We've had a good conversation. I'd also like to say, Mako, I know that you like to be pretty accessible, even though you're in Boston. I know Lynette's joined a Zoom call before. I mean, but I personally have found, Mako, you, and you know, like you have a lot of Bible materials online that you share for free on like more than half of the books of the Bible, like all of your notes from that you've ever done from like sermons and from Bible studies with church stuff. And so I just want to encourage you guys, like we want to be people that are, innocent as doves, but wise as serpents, right? And I really appreciate Lynette talking about enjoying learning history. That's a big part of learning to follow Jesus. And one thing I really appreciate about Marquise too, like you're very transparent, Marquise, when you're saying, I don't know if this is true. This is something that I've heard from other people. Like there's something about being really wise and constantly learning, right? That I think reflects Jesus. So when it comes to this thing, like, because it's not one or the other, it's not black and white. Is America Christian? Yes, no, you know, that sounds like something where, well, I'll keep learning over time. And I think that's okay. I think it's a good thing to normalize that way of thinking about things. It looks like, Mako, you put your website on here for anybody who's interested. But I want to, Mako, I really want to thank you for sharing with us. And you know, we like to pray for, or I don't know if I should say we, but I like to have us pray for those who come and share with us, because I think it's a way to bless, reciprocate, because it's not like we're paying you all this money to come share with us. By the way, Mako came and shared for free, so please thank him. But one way we can is to really ask the Lord to bless you and your efforts. So I don't know if anybody here wants to kind of volunteer to pray over Mako and his work in the neighborhood of Dorchester, and you know, in blessing other Christians and other people, to help them follow Jesus. Anybody want to volunteer to pray? It's not going to be me.
Lynette. Sure.
Hey, Lynette.
Thanks, Lynette.
Dear Holy Father, thank you for just gathering us, and thank you for having such an interesting conversation tonight, Lord. Thank you for having Mako send some enlightenment on some history, and just letting us share candidly of how we feel about America as a Christian nation, Lord. I just pray that you bless Mako, bless his family, bless all the work that he's doing, Lord, and give him the heart to continue and go spread this knowledge to other people and help other people understand what it means to be a Christian, what it means to walk in your footsteps, and what it means to be a light in the world, Lord. In your name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Friends, it's been great being with you. Thanks